Hi. Shush. Sorry. Machine decided to make noise behind me. I don't know if my mic picked it up. But yeah. I gotta go sweep by the bird's cage after this. Or in an hour. Whichever comes first. I'll be honest, I half gave up with the art. Halfway through I gave up with the art here. So if you're wondering why it's like slightly soft shaded and then slightly hard shaded, that's why. Especially on the face. I just didn't like how the lines look, so I just said fuck it. And soft shaded that part. Eh, it could be worse. It could be better, but it could be worse. I didn't really know what the hell to do with the cover art anyway, so best I could do was this. I could have done better, but whatever. Anyway, let's get on to this. This is Black Cats Are Bad Luck and So Are You Kid by Holly, chapter 24. Hazashi was fucking pissed. Some man had walked up to him while his husband was checking the house over. He wore a mail carrier suit and was asking about one of the tenants. Apparently, he had delivered to the wrong address the other day. He tilted his screen at Sasashi's face, and a plume of smoke came out and choked Sasashi's senses. Before he knew what was going on, he heard the door slam and the sound of wheels squealing off into the distance. He immediately jumped up from the car and rubbed his eyes, trying to clear them. He heard the vehicle zooming off, and he took off after them, half blind, though the bastards were already gone into the distance before Azashi could even scream. He collapsed onto the ground as he heard the familiar whipping of his husband's capture weapon above him, chasing the van. Azashi knew that he was going after them, and after a few minutes, the police arrived and checked him over. He was rushed to the hospital so they could make sure whatever gas he had been sprayed with wouldn't affect him anymore. But after he cleared the drug out of his senses, he felt fine and biologically was normal. He left the hospital and was taken back home, where his husband stood in the center of all the chaos, slowly diminishing from the late hour and the lack of evidence to be collected. Though Hisashi immediately see the anger and panic in his husband's eyes when he approached. The man turned to see him and walked over, and Hisashi physically saw the man's body relax, though not extremely. There was there was camera footage with multiple angles of the kidnappers, though it would take a while to find anything. They were promised to hear from them as soon as they found anything. Hisashi took over and thanked the detective, and the crowd departed. His husband was up in the apartment holding their cat, who was still in their carrier, pacing around the room. As soon as Hisashi entered, he picked up and walked over, and Hisashi gave him the update. The man sighed angrily, and his fists clenched. But Hisashi lifted one of his hands into both of his own and pulled him closer, and the man shoved his face into the blonde's shoulder and wept. Hisashi stood and rubbed his back comfortingly, already plotting on how to deafen the ears and boil of whoever decided to fuck with him and his family. Izuku was just waiting for his homeroom teacher to come back while he enjoyed his treat, when a strange man came up to the car and began talking with his English teacher. Then the next thing he knew, a strange dust filled the car, and he woke up in complete darkness with strange smells. He sat up, sniffing the air. It smelled like smoke, but sour, like leaves. There was also the smell of something rotting and alcohol, also cleaning supplies. He tried to sit up, but he didn't feel great and fell over onto his side as he sat up. He whined softly and curled up into a small ball and cried to himself. He was scared. and he didn't know where he was. He would take a sushi aggressively cleaning his fur rather than this. He stayed like that until he heard voices from somewhere outside space he was in. He still felt sick, so he didn't move out of where he was curled up, but he curled up a little more and hid his face. Fear rushed over him in waves, as he was powerless and the size of a kitten. There was a sudden rush of light as the cloth was removed off the cage he was in, and he heard the familiar voices of the two men that broke into his teacher's room above him. Is he dead? No, he's breathing. He is also listening to us. Look at his ears. They're slightly pointed at us. I mean, I kinda see it. He mostly just looks dead. The second man sighed, and Izuku waited for a moment for them to continue. But then the cage tilted to the side and he scrambled to find his footing. The dizziness returned and he yowled pitifully, landing hardly on the metal bars of the cage. His foot stuck between one of the bars. He looked at the two men above him, ears tilted back and pupils wide. There was a small man right in front of the cage. He was holding it on his eye. He had short brown hair and a small, scruffy, and kind of pathetic beard. He wore a thick and large coat with a black t-shirt under it. The other man was much taller and broader, and peering from behind the first to look at Izuku in the cage. He had curly, dirty blonde hair and was clean shaven. He smiled at Izuku, and he saw that most of the man's teeth were crooked or missing. The first man smiled and moved to the side so the other could see Izuku better. See? He's fine. The man let the cage fall, and Izuku fell with his foot still in the cage. He yowled in pain as his foot twisted, and he fell. The larger man yelped nervously and ripped the cage door off, reaching in and gently prying Izuku's paw from the cage and bringing him closer to hold. The smaller man yelled unhappily, smacking the man's side and yelling at him, though the man was ignoring his partner in favor of checking Izuku's paw over. He nervously shifted in the man's hold, hyperventilating. The man could hold Izuku in his palm. He was so large, and he just ripped the metal door of the hinge. The man scrunched his face up happily at the sight of Izuku's now swelling paw and sighed. Put him down, you crazy ass. That's our hostage. You hurt him. I'm gonna fix him. Can't hurt little cats like that. He's a human, you dolt. Not a cat. He may look like a cute cat, but he's still a kid. The large man interrupted his partner and began to walk away, much to the dismay of his friend. He left the other man flabbergasted as he walked through the dingy building and up the stairs. The man carried Izuku into a small room where it seemed the two were staying. It wasn't far from where Izuku was held, just a room over. The man sat down on an old and gross bed, probably same bed that they had found within the building they were in. He reached over and grabbed something, and Izuku moved, gently setting him on something soft. It smelled like sweat and smoke, but the man smiled down at Izuku, seemingly trying to soothe his nerves. As Izuku trembled and swayed, the man slowly and exaggeratedly reached over and grabbed a bag. Izuku curled up a bit into himself, ignoring his now sprained ankle. The man pulled out what seemed to be soothing cream and some gauze. He set the items down and began to gently smear some of the cream onto Izuku's injury. It helped quite a bit, and soothed the pain. Izuku looked back at it curiously, and watched as the man gently took some of the gauze and wrapped his leg up so there would be some pressure on his brain, but not too much, and so the cream would stay on. Once he was all fixed up, the man lifted Izuku up in his hold once more and smiled down at him. Zuko was still unsure about the man, but he seemed sincere. It was when the other man interrupted, clearing his throat. "You done then, dumbass?" The other man looked up at his partner, who was leaning on the door to the room they were sitting in. He sighed and nodded, standing from the creaking bed, and walked over to the other. The shorter man sighed and walked out of the room, towards a tall metal box. The larger man clenched Izuku closer to his chest protectively, startling the small boy. The other man sighed and pointed into the box, looking at the larger man expectantly. "You broke the cage we had. This is all we got. This is what we've got. Give me the kid." The man glared at the smaller, putting Izuku slightly closer to himself. He shook his head and backed away slightly. Something dark flicked across the smaller man's face, and he stepped forward angrily. "Mammoth, you dare defy my orders? The orders of the boss? You don't want to be disloyal, do you? You know what happens to those that are." The man, Mammoth now, hesitated. He shook slightly, and Izuku could feel his heartbeat increase from where he was pressed against his hand and chest. He eventually sighed, and Izuku felt the defeat seep into his bones. Mammoth reluctantly released Izuku into the smaller man's hold, and the man smiled happily. "I'm sorry, Mirth." The man hummed and dropped Izuku into the box. Izuku landed with a yelp, and he heard the man speaking above him. "You'll behave right from now on, right?" Zuko heard Mammoth hum defeatedly and agreeingly. Mirth spoke up once more, a pleased tone in his voice. "Good. Let's not have any more deflections." Something heavy was set on top of the box, and Izuku was cast in darkness once more. There was a small hole in the bottom of the box that he looked through. He saw Mammoth being led away by Mirth. Though Izuku saw the large man look back at the box sadly. Izuku laid there for a while, but he heard heavy footsteps walk towards him a few minutes later. Trying to be quiet, the box lid was taken off, and Izuku saw Mammoth above him. The man smiled apologetically and gently sat down a cloth he had set Izuku on earlier into the box. He smiled once more before whispering, "Sorry, kid," and shutting the lid to the box. He lingered outside the box for a moment before retreating back towards where their rooms were. Izuku curled up on the shirt he was given, because as bad as the smell was, the box was cold and hard. He curled up tight into the shirt and cried again, shaking slightly with the force of his grief. And this is the end of chapter 24. I will warn you, some of these chapters are going to get a little worse. So, you know. Anyway, that's all for this chapter. Wait a minute, I just noticed I did that for 12 minutes straight? Holy shit! Anyway, ending now.